We all love a good video game, right? Right, but there is nothing worse than when a game that was average at best in the first place then gets a sequel. There are plenty of examples of this throughout the history of video games, and most of them you will have already deleted from memory. Rightfully so. Today, we're discussing video games that got a sequel but never should have. Stay with us. First up, it's Knack. Anyone who's ever played this one will know that it can probably be considered an okay game for children, but adults are never going to take it seriously, and it absolutely did not need, let alone deserve, a sequel. The game was pretty boring, and players had to navigate the game's hero, known as Knack, would you believe, through different levels in a third-person style. Knack is a humanoid organism surrounded by smaller relics who must save mankind from the goblins. Of course, you must also deal with the treacherous former friend of Knack who has turned against you, and as terrible as this sounds, someone at Sony actually commissioned a second game, probably losing their job in the process. Once the sequel was announced, many fans felt comfortable mocking the studio, but they didn't listen. Knack 2 was released and probably occupies bargain bins in most game stores around the world, as the gameplay was pretty much the exact same as the original. Did you play either of the Knack games? Let us know below. Two Worlds is up next. Stay with us. It is often wondered why companies commission a sequel to a game that was distinctly average, and that question could certainly be asked about Two Worlds and its unwanted sequel. The game initially tried to cash in on the uber-popular open-world RPGs that were all the rage when it dropped back in 2007, but ultimately failed as, like Knack, it was just boring. The game was repetitive, and the developers had failed to understand what made a great RPG. The last thing they needed then was a sequel, but hey, we got one anyway. This one was, however, a little different in the fact that the sequel was actually more well-received than its predecessor, but the game was still plagued by glitches, with the console version being difficult to navigate and oddly organized according to some. Did you play Two Worlds? Let us know what you thought of it below. Next up, it's Naughty Bear, which features an interesting premise to say the least. This one dropped back in 2010 and was instantly scrutinized for its bizarre storyline. The Naughty Bear in question is tired of never being invited to play with his peers, so of course, the only thing any self-respecting Naughty Bear would do, he goes on a killing spree. We're obviously being sarcastic, and the premise of the game is nothing out of the ordinary, but it was really poorly made. Not to mention, it wasn't particularly exciting in the slightest. It was also derided for its dizzying controls and bad camera angles, which only served to help players miss approaching enemies altogether, to the frustration of most gamers. The developers got the balance of this one completely wrong, and it was basically just a game which glorified horror killings without so much as a dash of humor or a compelling storyline. So obviously we need a sequel, right? Naughty Bear Picnic in Paradise dropped in May 2012 to little fanfare, and we're guessing the picnic was probably ruined by some maniacal bear on a killing spree? We haven't played it, but if you have, let us know how it was below. Now it's Resident Evil 5. Stick around. There was a time when the name Resident Evil sent excitement through the bodies of gamers everywhere, but after the fifth, that excitement quickly vanished as the developers decided to head off in a new direction, moving away from the successful horror angle they had become synonymous with and focusing on an all-new action-adventure look. The third-person shooter dropped in March 2009, with the sixth installment arriving 3 years later in 2012. The trailer for the fifth game was shrouded in controversy as it was alleged the developers were racist due to the fact that the trailer showed a white character killing black enemies in an African village. But some people rallied against this theory, explaining that a game set in Africa is of course going to come across some black characters. Even after the poor reception, the developers got to work on number 6, living off the good name the franchise had developed before Resident Evil 5. But the sixth one was also a flop, with both games being widely considered the two worst in the franchise's history, before a back-to-basics approach with the seventh installment won fans over again. Watch Dogs is up next. Don't go anywhere. When Ubisoft released the trailer for Watch Dogs, fans were intrigued and excited to see what the sandbox game would bring, as the gameplay looked amazing. The graphics were also one of the big draws for this one, and the game had a huge budget of $68 million, but fans were ultimately left disappointed as the gameplay was nothing like how Ubisoft had portrayed it. Watch Dogs was derived from the hit Driver game series, so fans were super confident this one would be everything they dreamed of, but it didn't quite live up to the hype. When it was announced that Ubisoft had given the sequel the green light, fans were not impressed due to the disaster of the first game, but the second one was more successful than the first, so Ubisoft sanctioned a third game, which dropped a couple of years back. We're talking Star Wars Battlefront now. Stay with us. The original Battlefront series is a beloved franchise, which fans will almost certainly cherish forever. That said, the reboot, which dropped in 2015, was ultimately disappointing, as it was such a change from the game's original roots. Some fans did actually actually like it, but the game generally received mixed reviews, so it was a bit of a surprise when EA decided to give the game a sequel. Fans weren't tremendously excited once it was announced, but it turned out pretty good, so EA were probably justified in their stance. The fact that they went in a different direction to the original reboot made fans accept it a little more, which was great. Did you guys play Star Wars Battlefront? What did you think? Give us your thoughts below. Next up, it's Call of Duty Black Ops 2. Stick around. As we know, the Call of Duty franchise is legendary, but Black Ops 2 was one of those games that ultimately flattered to deceive. The story, for one, was pretty bland and basically just followed the first game. There was one particular positive to Black Ops 2, the multiplayer feature, which was classed one of the best in the franchise. When the developers announced there would be a third Black Ops game, fans almost rioted as they saw one of their most beloved franchises heading down the pan. One thing fans focused on was the wall running and special abilities, which they were almost embarrassed about. Many fans missed the days of the traditional combat aspect, which made the game what it was. What is your favorite game in the Call of Duty franchise? Let us know below. Bubsy is up now. Don't go anywhere. There probably aren't many people out there who would rank Bubsy anywhere near their top 10 games of all time, as the original offered absolutely nothing that gamers hadn't seen before. The game controls were pretty dire, and there was patchy design throughout the whole thing, as well as clunky gameplay, amongst other things. For all of these reasons, it was a huge surprise when the developers announced they were giving the original a sequel, which dropped back in 1994. Admittedly, the sequel performed much better than the original, but the sequel was still unwarranted as the first game was derided so much. Did you play Bubsy back in the day? How did you rate it? Let us know below. Crackdown 2 now. Stick around. Many fans thought Crackdown 2 was actually a decent game, but a sequel? Probably not. There is a case to be made that the first Crackdown game from Ruffian Games probably shouldn't have received a sequel, but hey, we got one anyway. Fans criticized the franchise for trying to mimic GTA too much, but it's nowhere near the legendary game if truth be told. Crackdown 2 players were genuinely shocked when the third game was announced, and it didn't fare much better than its predecessor and was roundly panned. Which Crackdown game was best in your opinion? And finally, it's Red Steel. This one was absolutely ridiculed when it dropped, as many gamers reported controls which just did not work, which is kind of important for any game, right? As well as this, the graphics weren't great either, as many characters had a cutout effect with a white background, which was pretty brutal. This one absolutely did not deserve a sequel, but in 2010, we got one anyway. Pretty crazy. As always, thanks for stopping by today, and remember to join us next time for some more fun and games. Also, why not like and share today's video, as well as subscribing to our channel. Bye guys!